Outbound didn't fail. You just ran the test wrong. And that mistake is quietly costing you months of pipeline. Every time you conclude outbound doesn't work for us after trying one channel. That single mistake cost more pipeline than bad copy, bad tools, or bad reps combined. Because once you killed a channel permanently, you don't just lose deals, you lose confidence in the entire motion. I'm Bob, founder of RevSync, and I've spent my time inside real B2B go-to-market systems after teams have already tried email, LinkedIn calls, ads, and agencies, and still feel stuck. What I've learned is simple. Outbound rarely fails at execution first. It fails at interpretation. In this video, I'm gonna walk you through 3 reasons outbound looks broken when it actually isn't, and how to read the signals correctly before you shut down the entire system that is still working underneath the surface. If you're a founder, CRO, or RevOps leader, you felt this exact moment. Activity is happening, leads are flowing in unevenly. Responses feel inconsistent, and suddenly the question becomes, is outbound even worth it? The problem is not that you're asking the question. The problem is that most teams answer it using the wrong data at the wrong time, also with the wrong expectations. The old assumption is that outbound success should be obvious, quickly. If it works, replies should spike, meetings should roll in, and the answer should feel clear within weeks. The new reality is that outbound data is delayed, uneven, and noisy by nature because buyers don't behave in neat linear ways. When you expect clarity too early, you turn ambiguity into false failure. So pillar 1, early outbound data lies, and teams treat it like truth. The first reason outbound looks broken is that early outbound data lies, but teams treat it like a verdict. Low reply rates, delayed responses, or silence are read as rejection when they're often just timing mismatches. Outbound is not like paid ads where feedback loops are instant. Buyers open emails days later, think about messages without responding, look you up quietly, and only engage once enough information is gathered around you. I see this most clearly during seasonal shifts. In December, response rates across multiple campaigns dropped sharply. And if you looked at the surface level metrics, it would have been easy to say, oh, outbound stopped working. But what actually happened was buyer attention shifted, not buyer intent. Conversations didn't disappear. They just repeated later through different moments and different surfaces once the noise died down. The pain here is brutal because leaders feel clueless. You're staring at dashboards wondering whether to double down or pull back. And the pressure to make a call pushes you to interpret incomplete data as the final answer. The paradigm shift is learning to separate absence of responses from absence of interest. Silence early on doesn't mean no. It often means not now, not here, not like this. In the best performing GTM systems I've seen, outbound data isn't judged on isolation. It's interpreted across time, channels, and buyer behavior. So teams don't pull the plug too early. Pillar 2, teams test outbound like a feature, not a buyer behavior change. The second reason outbound looks broken is that teams test it like a feature launch instead of a buyer behavior change. They assume one exposure should be enough to trigger action. And when it doesn't, they assume the system failed. In reality, outbound is asking a buyer to do something unnatural. You're asking them to pay attention to something they don't really seek out, trust relevance without prior context, and invest time in a conversation they did not plan for. That doesn't happen in one touch. It happens through conditioning, not convincing. Email rarely closes deals on its own, and its real job is an intro to the problem, framing, and plant the seeds for recognition, even if the buyer never replies. LinkedIn rarely converts on cold at first message. Its job is to validate that you're real, relevant, and not a random spam operation. Calls rarely work when they're truly cold. They work when the buyer has seen your name, your message, or your brand enough that the interpretation feels justified. Ads don't magically create demand either. They reduce friction by making your company feel familiar before you ask for time. When teams test channels independently, they miss this behavioral layer entirely. Each channel looks weaker than it actually is because none of them are allowed to do their real job in the sequence. The ICP frustration here is feeling like you're constantly starting over. Every new channel feels like a reset instead of progression. So nothing ever compounds. The paradigm shift is realizing that outbound doesn't convert buyers. It conditions them until conversation becomes safe. When you test outbound as a behavior change over time, not one-shot tactic, the data suddenly makes sense. Pillar 3, most teams quit during the interpretation gap. The hard reason Outbound looks broken is the most dangerous one. Most teams during what I call the interpretation gap, the period where the activity continues, but clarity hasn't arrived yet. This is the stretch where replies are inconsistent, patterns aren't obvious, and leadership discomfort kind of peaks. Instead of accepting ambiguity as part of the process, teams treat discomfort as proof that something is not working or wrong. This is where reactive decisions are made. Outbound gets paused and ICPs rewritten. Offers get changed and tools get swapped, not because systems failed, but because the signals weren't yet interpretable. The truth is that Outbound often looks weakest right before it starts to stabilize. Buyer exposure is accumulating, familiarity is building, and response probability is increasing, but it hasn't crossed the visible threshold just yet. When teams stop, they never collect the return on work they've already paid for. They also train their company to abandon strategies before compounding can occur. The ICP pain shows up as whiplash. 1 month Outbound is promising and the next month is dead. And leadership starts to believe growth is inherently unpredictable. When teams ask why Outbound feels unpredictable, the answer is almost never effort. It's that no system exists to interpret buyer signals before leadership steps in and resets everything. If you want to pressure test Outbound correctly, stop asking whether a channel works in isolation. Start asking what that channel contributes to buyer progression. The email's job might be awareness, not replies. LinkedIn's job might be credibility, not meetings. Calls might only work after familiarity exists, not before. Once you define the job of each channel, you stop killing them for not doing work. They were never designed to be alone. This is how you turn Outbound from a gamble into an experiment. You're no longer guessing whether something works, you're observing how buyers actually move. If I were in your seat, I would design Outbound with fewer expectations and more structure. One ICP slice, one clear problem framing, and enough time for exposure to accumulate before you judge results. I would measure not just replies, but delayed responses, multi-touch engagements, and downstream conversation once familiarity exists. And most importantly, I would resist the urge to intervene every time the data feels uncomfortable, because most Outbound systems don't need saving. They need patience. If you want help diagnosing whether your Outbound truly failed or whether you misread the signals, get in touch with me using the link in the description below. We'll walk through your data with a clear interpretation lens instead of just gut feel. Outbound isn't dead and it's rarely broken. Most of the time, it's just misunderstood. And once you learn how to read it properly, it stops feeling random and it starts feeling very comfortable.